The motto of this show has always been that you don't need to just survive retirement. You really need to be intentional so you can figure out how to rock it. And that takes counting the cost of what rocking retirement really looks like, which is the theme for this month on the Retirement Answer Man Show with me, your host, Roger Whitney. So last week in the first episode of this month-long series on counting the cost of retirement, we talked about taking the first step into identifying what those basic non-discretionary needs are: shelter, food, clothing, insurance, taxes. That's like the noodles of a spaghetti dish. Noodles by themselves may give you some nourishment, but it's not going to be very exciting. We need to add some sauce to the whole mix, and that's the topic of today's show. What are the wants? What's the sauce to bring some spice to your life and help you really rock retirement? So that's what we're going to talk about today to help you define that for yourself in this month-long series. But we can't do any of that until we have that all-important disclaimer. Now, you may not want this disclaimer, but you sure need it. You really do. We all do. And that is, don't take advice from me on this show. I don't give advice to you because I don't know you. I only give advice to people I work for as a fiduciary, that I'm walking life with them and helping them figure out, this whole retirement thing. If you're looking for an advisor to walk life with you can go to rogerwhitney.com and we can set up a time to chat. But until then, you do need to know. Take this as helpful hints and education and talk to your legal advisor, your tax advisor, your financial advisor, maybe your life advisor, anybody that really knows you well enough to advise you. With that, let's go talk about why retirement is so different for your generation and what that means in counting the cost in the Hot Topic segment. So if you haven't already figured it out, your retirement is going to be unlike anybody else's in the history of man and womankind. As we talk about on the show, many times you're going to live longer than any other generation. You're going to be healthier in terms of your activity than any other generation in history. You are likely not going to have a pension or a social safety net like your parents or grandparents did. And fundamentally, for your generation, retirement is looked upon not as the time to rest like it was for past generations that had to do major physical labor, had horrible diets, had bad or not near as well of healthcare and technological advances as you and I are blessed to have. And so when they retired, they looked at their later years as the time to sit on the park bench of life. And so they were very happy with that basic needs category, and this wants category, this sauce, didn't have to be a lot from a financial perspective. But you, my friend, because of all the reasons I mentioned, fundamentally my impression and what I hear over and over again is retirement is viewed as our chance to live and to pursue things that we haven't had time to pursue, especially in early retirement. And that's where this wants category comes in. So I want to give you some helpful hints in this Hot Topic segment, and then in the Practical Planning segment, we'll noodle on what some of these wants look like from my perspective and all the people that I get to talk with. So, like we talk about in the book, Rock Retirement, it's always best to go big first when we're talking about these wants for a couple reasons. One is it's your chance to live, and more than ever, someone that's near retirement or retiring wants to make the most, especially of the early years. So my challenge to you is to really think big about what this want category can look like. Now, in doing this, when we're counting the cost of retirement, we can confuse a great life as spending. And that ends up, when we're talking from a financial perspective, it ends up being the focus is cash flows. What do we have to spend on things? But as you're noodling on this want category, don't confuse. Don't think it has to be spending. There are a lot of things we can do that are the spice of life that don't cost a ton of money or any money. So don't confuse that and don't misinterpret me as we talk about this. Because I always feel weird when I'm challenging people to think bigger about their lives because it sounds like I'm just focused on spending, because I'm the financial guy, right? I got to figure out how we pay for this stuff. And I don't want to make it feel like it's materialistic. So don't confuse the two. And the one reason I feel like I have to poke people a lot on thinking about this spice of life is a lot of times the people that are overfunded from a retirement standpoint and have the most opportunity from a want category are generally the people that have the hardest time thinking of what these things might be because they've built really good habits in living on less than they earn, saving, doing things that bring spice that don't cost a lot of money. So when they get to retirement, they find themselves in an overfunded position. And this isn't everybody, I understand that, but many do, especially people that have, saved religiously for a long period of time. And so it's hard the muscle of indulging a little bit during this harvest time from a financial asset standpoint of retirement, that muscle is really atrophied and it feels uncomfortable, which is understandable, which is a great place to start from. So what are some ways that you can do this? Well, one is you don't want to be stuck by what is. We're always going to start there, what you spend and what you do for enjoyment right now, if you're still working, is definitely where you want to start. But you don't want to be stuck as if that is your only possibility. Some things you can think about is, well, if you arranged your life for what will be when you actually have more time freedom on the other side of retirement, you can think a little bit more creatively. Maybe there are some passions that you've not had time for or that you haven't visited in maybe decades. Things that you enjoyed when you're in your 20s before you had children or your career really got going that you maybe have even forgotten about, that you might be able to revisit. It's time to start noodling on what those things might be and starting off with a brainstorm list and then thinking, yeah, I would like to pick up guitar again. I would like to go take cooking classes in Europe or whatever it is. And second, I think the second tip is your life is arranged a certain way. Your home is in a location because of schools or because of commute or because of family that has since moved on or grown up or won't be there forever. And when you retire, well, you don't need to worry about the commute anymore. If your kids are older, you don't need to worry about school districts anymore. If your family has moved away or at some point will pass away, as we all do, you can rearrange how you think about where you live. So don't get stuck in what is, because that could limit what could be when you're thinking about the spice of life. So how do you do this? Because this can be really hard. I think it has to be a series of conversations with yourself or with friends or with your spouse to get your mindset around that, hey, everything is changing when we retire and we really have a blank slate to make our life how we think we want it to be. So I think it has to be a series of conversations. And some of the things you can do together or by yourself to imagine is, what will I be doing in retirement? What kind of activities do I want to be doing every single day? Who will I be doing them with? And it could be a specific person. Maybe you want to be near your grandkids. Or it could be the type of person that you want to be surrounded by, because that might help you figure out where you might want to move to. What would be the ideal weather or climate that we lived in? What would be the ideal size? Do we want urban? Do we want suburban? Do we want a college town? Do we want rural? What environment do you want to see yourself in? Not thinking so much about what is right now, because default is always going to be the default. What is right now will always be the default that you just keep moving forever. And I keep challenging myself, and actually I challenge my wife on this too in our discussions, so we can at least take a fresh look and not be trapped by what is. So these are some ideas to help you start to flush out this want list so we can actually put a cost to it and see if they're possible. So there's some tips. Now let's go into the practical planning segment and define what some of those common wants generally are. So if you have been a good farmer and you've went out every day, you earn the income by working the fields, you brought home and saved and invested and saved and invested and managed to build financial resources over decades. Retirement is sort of that time to harvest those to provide for you and your family when you won't be working the fields anymore. You won't be working the farm near as much. It's a harvest time. And that can be hard to express when you're used to toiling forever. I have clients who are way overfunded from a financial perspective for their ideal life. And they're still saving in retirement while they receive Social Security or pension or the income thrown off of portfolios and things like that. They don't have any need for the money, even though they're way overfunded. That muscle is so strong, but their view on what makes them happy fits, and that's okay. So then for them, obviously we'll get to what happens next week is what those aspirational things are. If you're going to die with a lot of money, because you're so overfunded and your lifestyle is so moderate compared to your assets, then you want to be intentional about what you do with those. That's a conversation for next week. But I think it's also a conversation for now on what these wants might be. You know, for many people, when I'm talking to them about this spice of life, this sauce to their noodles, they are really focused on the first 10, 15 years of retirement. There's this need out there with retirees of, hey, I've worked so hard, I'm still relatively healthy, intellectually, physically, and other ways, that I want to make the most of it. I don't want to continue to sacrifice until I'm too old or fragile to be able to do things that I've put off doing or that I enjoy doing now. And that's what this want category is. Really, it's really about this go-go years of how do we make the most of that, knowing that we will have a more traditional retirement later in life where we actually are on the park bench of life. So this conversation ends up being about those go-go and slow-go seasons, and we'll get to that in a little bit. So what are some of the things that people value? Well, in talking to hundreds, if not thousands of individuals and surveying you and you telling me, one of the biggest values we have is travel, is the sense of adventure in those early years to go out and see the world around us. So that definitely falls into this want category, right? So that may be on your list. And as we're counting the cost for these wants and you're thinking of travel, are we talking about local travel? I have, some clients that they like to travel, but they just want day trips around where they're at. They have no interest to seeing other countries or even a lot of other states, but they do like travel. So that's going to define how you count the cost for that. It could be international travel. It could be going all over the world. Like I have clients that are very interested in that. That's a season that I'm in. I'm going to Mongolia. And I think this year we're thinking about Madagascar. Don't know anything about it, but we're going to figure it out. Is international travel part of what you're looking at? Or maybe it's just the United States and seeing all of the states. I have a buddy who came through over the holidays who he and his kids are focused on hitting all 50 states. So you want to define what travel actually means to you if this is something that you value in the want category. And then you want to define, okay, how often will I be traveling? Is this something that you're going to do once a month because it's local? Is it one big trip a year? What's the frequency? Is it a bunch of local trips every year, but every other year you do a big trip? Because as you define this, that will help you be able to count the cost, which is the next step is, okay, what's the budget for the kind of travel that you imagine for you and your family? Is it the Ritz? Do you like to treat yourself? And, traveling, whether it's locally or internationally, can be literally anywhere from the Ritz on up to in a tent and bushwhacking it. And I've seen both with clients that I've worked with. It doesn't matter. Don't put a value on which one is right or wrong. The question is only, which one do you envision, or do you and your spouse envision for yourself? Because that will help you calculate the cost. Let's say that you like local travel, which sounds inexpensive, right? You just want to travel around your state, but you want to do it every 3 months, and you want to stay at the Ritz for a week each time, and you always want to use the spa and the golf facilities. That, although it sounds local, you start to define it that way, can be a lot more expensive. And this is something you're going to need to do to count the cost of what it will be so you can figure out how you're going to pay for it if it's of value to you. It could now, and if we go on to hobbies, which is, another thing, if a lot of people want to have free time to go pursue a particular interest. I think of a friend who has a goal of taking action shots at every pro NFL stadium. Loves football, loves photography. So his goal is to travel around during his retirement to all of these stadiums and get as close to the field as possible, which means better tickets, and take action shots and then create a book from them. I think that's a beautiful idea and pursuit as a hobby because he enjoys football and he enjoys photography. Now, just like hobbies, you might have a hobby like this, or maybe your hobby is knitting or furniture restoration or boating or fishing or cycling. Define what these passions are or what these dormant passions are that you want to reignite and start to put a cost to what they're going to be. Because just like travel, they can be very modest from a cash flow standpoint. I think of cycling on this one. I have my dream bike, and I'm embarrassed to say what it cost me, but it was a lot of money. And I ride it, and I've done races with it. And there are friends I have that ride 15-year-old bicycles that weren't that awesome to begin with that are faster than me. So is my passion really cycling by itself, or do I like to have nice things along with the hobbies that I do? Right? He enjoys cycling just as much as I do, and in fact, he's better at it than I am. So we have the same hobby, but this guy hasn't spent money on a bicycle in over a decade. Very different than me. One is not right, one is not wrong, but that will define the cost of the hobby that you identify in terms of the thing that you want to pursue. So I want to just make sure you understand and see that as you start to think about what you're going to be doing with your time and pursuing. It's not just identifying that, but then having a realistic talk with yourself of what does that really mean from a cash flow perspective and what it's going to take to pay for it. Another want I see in retirement is starting a business. Either we've always had the entrepreneurial bug, or maybe you've always been attracted to entrepreneurism, but it's risky. It feels risky, and you're providing it for your family, so the corporate job or whatever served a purpose. A lot of times I'll see people want to start a business in retirement. Interestingly enough, a lot of times that's around their hobby. I know someone right now who is fanatical knitter, and they're starting a yarn shop. Now, this is a total legitimate want to define for yourself. My only counsel would be careful, because an avocation, which is a hobby, and a vocation have very different matrix for what makes sense. And a lot of times what we can do is we can start a venture around an avocation of something we enjoy and call it a vocation, a business, but we're not doing enough of the defining of, does this really make sense? It's a really quick way to waste a lot of money. You can see that on Shark Tank sometimes, and some of the things that people that present there. So we got to be careful about that. Other things are back to school. I have a lot of clients that like to go back to school and learn a language, pursue study of a hobby. Maybe it's going to theology, studying theology or philosophy or photography or languages, all those types of things. You just want to define what those are. You can do that at the community college, and you can do that at Harvard. They have plenty of professional programs and high dollar schools. So you got to define that for yourself. So start at the high level, but then make sure you understand and are honest with yourself of what it's going to cost. Now, here are some pro tips as you're thinking about this spice and this sauce. Pro tip number one is as you think about each one of these, I challenge you to think about how do you make these social? Because your social network is a big indicator of how happy you are, even if you say you're a loner. So as you think of all of these things, how can you make them social in some way? For example, when I cycle, I generally cycle by myself just because of a time constraint. I'm trying to fit it in through my busy day. Well, in retirement, it doesn't have to be. I have the time to join a cycling group or to go on group rides, which will help me build my network outside of work. So maybe there's something that you're doing now and you don't have time to include anybody because of your busy schedule, but think about how to make these social. Second is, which we already hit on, is plan for seasons in these. So as you're thinking about these and counting the costs from a cash flow standpoint, be realistic for how long that season's going to be for your international travel. Let's use travel as an example. If you want to, say, spend $15,000 a year for travel, if that's just sort of what you put on a piece of paper, be realistic with yourself. Yeah, you want to do that at 60, your 60-year-old self. But if you just simply say, that's what I'm going to spend, and you put it out until end of plan, is that really realistic? Isn't it more likely going to be in the first 10 or 15 years? And at some point, you've been everywhere, you've gotten all the t-shirts. So we want to make sure for all of these wants, if it's appropriate, define it by a season as best you can and use that to help you calculate the cost. The third pro tip is be creative in how you look at accomplishing these things. One common thing I see is someone wanting to buy a home or a vacation property somewhere that they'd like to visit. Now, that is a very legitimate thing, and I've seen it done very successfully, where you spend half of the year, usually where your home base has always been, and then you spend another half of the year in a usually sunny location, so you can move with the weather. We call them snowbirds when I grew up in Michigan. So buying a second home or a condo is legitimate. You can rent it out. It has value. It will take some financial assets to cover. But I think you need to also consider, could you do that where you rent out a place where you want to go? That's so far, the objective of my wife and I is rather than buy a property that we go to consistently, that we're just going to rent homes in different places for different periods of time. Another example that might be good is with RV travel. And later this year, we're going to have a whole month on living the RV life in retirement. I call it the RV virus. And the initial reaction is, well, if you have the RV virus and you want to express it, you go buy an RV, right? Which can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars potentially. But maybe the RV virus just needs a fix where you can rent an RV for a month or two a year. So I just want to make sure you think creatively of how you actually execute on these, because that will affect how you count the cost of them. And then the last pro tip is challenge yourself now, especially if you're prior to retirement. How can you set yourself up financially prior to retirement when you lose your income in terms of purchasing the gear that you want, updating things so you are ready to slide into all of these hobbies that you get to. So I think this is an initial framework that you can use to start to count the cost of what these things that will bring spice to your life in retirement. Now, in the Rock Retirement Club, we're going to have some worksheets and dive deeper in how you exactly do this. So for you members, I will see you in the clubhouse so we can look at that. But for now, let's go get happy with Nichole. Hey, welcome to the Happy Lab. And to help us get happy in 2019, we bring on Nichole Rockstar Mills. Hey, Nichole.
Hey, I'm glad to be back.
Yes. So in the Happy Lab today, now you shared something with me that I'm going to share on the show. And I can...
Yeah, so this is all I know about the Happy Lab right now, everyone. He said, I'm going to share something on Happy Lab, and you're probably not going to like it.
I did not say not like it. Did I say not like it? Maybe. So you shared with me that you feel like you maybe laugh too much on the show. Do you feel that?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
I do feel like I do. When I listen to it, like when I listen to replays of the show, I'm like, man, I'm Always laughing. I need to be more serious. This is serious retirement stuff.
But you always join me in the Happy Lab, except when we're doing questions. So that's, sort of a fun thing, right?
That's true. That's true.
So, and I think this is a perfect Happy Lab subject, right? Because I don't think you laugh too much. We
Really?
may get some emails of people giving us replies. So, in Six Shot Saturday, tell us, do you think Nichole laughs too much? I think it's great. That's part of being happy.
Well, in that case, maybe I'll keep laughing. I worry that people think it's not
professional,
I'm too frivolous or something.
No, you are wicked smart.
Thank you.
Yes, you are. And what a cool combination of that and a joyful personality, right? So I think all of us can learn from that. We're dealing with financial subjects. Some of this is really scary. Doesn't mean we can't laugh. Doesn't mean we can't be joyful. So I think if you do that, you'll have a better life and be happy. So give me a laugh, Nichole.
I can't laugh on cue. That's not going to be genuine. Now you're laughing. There you go. See, Roger's laughing.
Okay, on to the smart sprint to set a goal to take a little baby step.
On your marks, get set.
And we're off to take a 7-day baby step to creating a wonderful life and rockin' retirement. All right, you know where we're going. This is Counting the Cost month on the Retirement Answer Man show. So within the next 7 days, start to define what are those essential needs that you're going to have to cover in retirement. And we'll have some resources. We'll send one out in Six Shot Saturday to help you define what those are and listen to the show again. But now just count the cost of what is it going to take to cover your housing, your clothing, and the rest of the things. Just start with a big top-down estimate for today, meaning that don't worry about getting into the details. Just start to define it for yourself, because that's a great first step in the next 7 days. Hey, if you enjoy the show and you want to get in your inbox every Saturday morning a summary of the show, plus some little extras that we throw in there, along with worksheets that we may talk about, go to rogerwhitney.com and sign up for Six Shot Saturday, which is our weekly email every Saturday morning where you can have a cup of coffee. You can read a summary of the show and get resources.
And sometimes you get a goofy picture of Roger.
Or Nichole. We don't talk about signing up for Six Shot Saturday, but we get amazing responses from people that get this one simple email on how to, rock retirement. So if you want that, go to rogerwhitney.com, and down below the first page, you can enter your name and email. Till next week, you be well, all right?
We appreciate you joining us today for this episode of Retirement Answer Man. Be sure to visit rogerwhitney.com/answers to access the Retirement Answer Library with over 30 checklists to help you make the most of the only life you have. Remember, you have more power than you realize to create an amazing life starting today with Retirement Answer Man. The opinions voiced in this material are for general information only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any individual. All performance referenced is historical and no guarantee of future results. All indices are unmanaged and may not be invested into directly. Have a wonderful day.